Namibia has deposited the instruments for the ratification of TOW, that is two International Labour Organization conventions concerning decent work for domestic workers and the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work in 2019, that is. The two conventions have been adopted for ratification in the National Assembly, that was in October this year. To talk to us further about the conventions and put into words what this means for Namibia, we are now joined by Advocate Vicki Toivo, the Special Advisor to the Minister of Labour, Industrial Relations and Employment Creations. Good morning, Advocate, and welcome to GMN.
Thank you, Thaddeus. Good morning.
Very well. Now, Advocate, let's start with the Convention on the Elimination of Violence and Harassment in the World of Work. What does this convention bind Namibia to?
Well, first, I would like to touch on what is meant by violence and harassment pursuant to this convention. The term violence and harassment in the world of work refers to a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices or threats thereof, whether a single occurrence or repeated, that aim at, result in, or are likely to result in physical, psychological, sexual, or economic harm, and includes gender-based violence and harassment. Now, this is when you ask what does it bind Namibia to, this is a very, very ambitious convention, not the normal or the typical ILO convention. This is a convention that seeks to change the way we relate to each other in the world of work, to inject a paradigm of human dignity, a respect for human dignity. And we are bound by all of the provisions of the convention. When Namibia ratifies an ILO convention, according to our constitution, it becomes part of the law of Namibia. Now, the convention requires Namibia to introduce a educational, legal, health and safety framework to prevent and eliminate violence of all kinds in the world of work, including gender-based violence, but also racist violence and harassment, bullying, stress-producing overwork. As I said, it requires a very, very big change in the way we deal with each other.
Correct.
So we are bound to introduce a set of legal measures that includes a right, and I will say we're preparing amendments to the Labor Act now in this regard. We'll introduce the right of everyone to be free from violence and harassment in the world of work. And by everyone, I'm not just talking about workers and employers. I'm talking about third parties such as customers, students, patients. They have a right to be free from violence, but they also must refrain from this type of behavior. We've seen things in the social media in Namibia where we even see customers attacking workers and so forth. So we will introduce not only the right to be free from violence and harassment, but an obligation of every employer, after consulting with the workers, to introduce a workplace policy on the prevention of violence and harassment, to do a risk assessment, to introduce complaint mechanisms, and it's a very detailed, it's a huge project, and it's not this project that we're talking about is not one that is going to be implemented overnight. We've started our work, but this is a much longer term project, and I must say there's a lot of interest in it.
Correct. Now, sexual harassment at work has been an issue globally that led to movements such as the Me Too movement, where women have found solidarity globally to speak up against this matter. We know that it's also something that is covered in the convention. In contextualizing this, how much of an issue is sexual harassment in Namibia?
Well, I must emphasize that sexual harassment and even other forms of harassment are often hidden. Workers hesitate to come forward because of the employment situation. You may complain about something, but you may lose your job. That's what they think. So we did some research in last year in preparation for the debate at the ILO, and I can say that as far as opinion is concerned, 72% of the women workers surveyed, thought that sexual harassment was a problem at the workplace. Almost as many men surveyed thought it was a problem. Now, this was a preliminary research. It only touched on researched certain industries in a limited location. But it's an indication. It's an indication that there is a perception that this is a big problem, but not always coming to the surface.
Yeah. Now, we're also talking about the concept of decent work for domestic workers. What does that mean?
Well, decent work for domestic workers means that workers, first of all, are treated with dignity, that their rights, including their right to organize, their right to all of the benefits that are in the Labor Act. It also means that they should have a fair income, a decent income, where they should be able to support their families, that they should not be exposed to hazardous conditions. And decent work also means where the employer and the employee can discuss issues and work things out. And
talking about decent income, Namibia have introduced the minimum wages that was for domestic workers in 2016. How is the implementation of this in Namibia?
Well, we introduced a minimum wage, and the minimum wage has been increased a couple of times since then. So on paper, it's moving. And I want to say, I think it's important for the nation to know that the minimum wage is not a decent wage. It is not a living wage. When we set this minimum wage, we said we were going to work towards increasing it. And it's been increasing in real terms. Now, we also introduced certain conditions of employment which supplement what is already binding in the Labor Act. The question of how well it's been implemented, we can look at the labor force survey of 2018 and see that there has been an increase in the average wages of domestic workers. All right? We also know that not all employers are adhering to this. This is a very big and ongoing struggle.
So compliance is an issue.
Okay. Compliance is always an issue. We introduced certain new measures to improve compliance in the last wage order. The last time we increased the wage, we also introduced a requirement that employers must submit returns. Now, the ability to enforce this is limited by the size of the country, the number of domestic workers, but also because domestic workers do not necessarily know their rights.
Correct, yeah.
A lot of
and that's something that this convention will also be putting in force. Okay. Yeah. Advocate, unfortunately, we ran out of time. I know that we have a lot to still cover on this topic, but we'll definitely keep you engaged on this topic.
Okay, thank you.
There you have it. I was in conversation with Advocate Vicki Toivo, who is a special advisor to the Minister of Labour, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation, talking to us about the two conventions that Namibia signed or ratified as instruments of the International Labour Organization, and just unpacking to what this means to Namibia.